Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our friend, the NEC PC-FX, one of history's most obscure game consoles, and some brand new accessories that have just come out for it. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, and subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, all that stuff, it's down there. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Yes, we are going to talk about the NEC PC-FX. Now, if you are not familiar with this system, this video is not a history lesson about it, but I will say I do have a video all about that if you're curious about exactly what the story with this thing is and the intimate detail of it. But in the event you actually don't want to click on that and you want a very, very short synopsis, basically what happened with this thing is if you've ever heard of the PC Engine, which was a wildly successful system in Japan, also known as the Turbografx 16 in North America, as well as the barely released Turbografx in just Europe, that system actually had a successor released by NEC, but in Japan only. And due to what I would call mismanagement and poor decisions, the system was a complete flop over there, ultimately only having about 62 games and a very short lifespan. That said, it's actually kind of a neat system despite its flaws, and again, I would just say some internal corporate mandates that kind of screwed the system over completely. And for those who don't know the timeline of events, it was intended to compete with things like the PlayStation, the N64, the Saturn, etc. It was part of the 5th gen era. Now, maybe you have heard of the system, maybe you have not, but it is a pretty cool system, and believe it or not, we now live in a time where a lot of retro game consoles have new accessories and things released for them, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Compliments of Stone Age Gamers, so big shout out to them, and full disclosure on this, as they did send me these for free for the purposes of review, we have two things to discuss. Both devices made by a company called Humble Bazooka. The first is known as the PC-FX BT, or BT standing for Bluetooth, and the other is the fx-nvbmp. Great names. Whether the FX stands for the FX and PC-FX, NV stands for non-volatile, and BMP stands up for backup memory pack. So we're going to talk about each device and in essence what they do. Both of which, the thing they have in common, other than who made them, is the color theme. Of course, is this kind of off-white / gray and purple cosmetic design, and they both have 3D printed casings, which is perfectly serviceable. They seem of high enough quality, and they both serve a very specific purpose. So we're going to start off first with the fx-nvbmp. Now, what is this thing? Now, here's the thing. For those people who are old enough to remember this, and to those who are young enough to have no idea what I'm talking about, back in the day, us old people who wanted to play our video games, whenever we were playing games and making progress in the game and we played them on cartridges, things like the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, what have you, you were able to save your progress within the cartridge, and that's how you would continue your adventure, and so on and so forth. And of course, from the OG Xbox onward, anytime you wanted to save your progress, you could do it internally. But in the 90s, for the most part, when we were kind of in the early days of CD-based content in video games, it wasn't always readily obvious how to do that, as you could not save stuff to CDs that were the active format in which you were playing the game. But they sometimes had internal storage. Things like the Sega Saturn had a very wonky internal storage system, as well as the Sega CD. And other systems just straight up wouldn't have one at all, like the original PlayStation. And the solution to that was to have memory cards. Fundamentally, that's what this is, a memory card specifically for the PC-FX. But what makes it a little more unique is that it's kind of addressing a problem that always existed with the PC-FX, and for the first time ever, we kind of have a solution to it. See, the thing with the PC-FX is it actually did have internal storage, a whopping 32 kilobytes of internal storage, which is a laughable number now, but at the time was at least acceptable to save a few games here and there to the internal memory. I mean, that makes sense. Obviously, the files are not going to be massive either, the internal save data. But NEC did, of course, prepare for the possibility that that was going to be insufficient, so they released their own version of a, effectively, memory card. I believe theirs is just called the fx-BMP. The NV part has a very specific purpose. See, the card that NEC released, from my understanding, it was done in limited quantities, obviously for a system that did not succeed, therefore there weren't a whole lot of them sold, and to make matters worse, they seem to have only sold them towards the end of the very limited lifespan of the console, making the cards effectively rather uncommon. Not necessarily super valuable, but not cheap either, and they have another flaw, which was how they were designed. Most memory cards do not require batteries in order for them to work, at least as the purpose of a memory card. The Dreamcast VMU, for example, does need a battery in order to use it as a VMU, but as a memory card, it's unrequired, and most of them don't. Well, unfortunately, NEC's designed, again, I can't even, BMP, did require, I believe it was either AA or AAA batteries. Humble Bazookas does not. They have used modern technology to eliminate that problem. Therefore, this thing does not need batteries. It's simply, you know, contained within the more modern tech. Your saves, it's a form of RAM, essentially, that just kind of holds the game saves forever. Now, the original memory cards that NEC produced were 128 kilobytes in capacity, which was 4 times better than the internal storage. Still not a crazy number, but at the same time, you have to remember that the entire PC-FX library is only 62 games, and every single game save combined barely will exceed 128 kilobytes. So when I first heard about this card, I thought, okay, they probably are using something substantially bigger. That would make a lot of sense. Turns out they're not. They're actually also using 128 kilobytes of storage, which at first seems a little off-putting. Like, why would you do that? Well, as it turns out, there is a reason for that, which is the next size up that would have been technically possible would have actually been 2 megabytes, which would have been massive overkill, believe it or not. There's no way all the games combined could ever have equated that. I know that sounds insane, but that wouldn't have been possible. And it would have substantially increased the price of the card, though. So it was decided to keep the original 128 kilobyte memory, as it would have basically been enough to hold almost every single game, if not every single game. And then, of course, with the additional 32 kilobytes of internal memory, you combine all that together, you're good to go. You're not going to need another card. So the card itself is actually relatively simple to use, but it does have some asterisks. If you look at the front of the system, you'll notice I just kind of opened this little door, and there's a slot in there. You basically just take it and you feed it into the system, plug it in, you close the little door, you kind of forget that it was ever even there. Now, if we turn the system on, which we can go ahead and do right here, and we'll make sure not to have the disk activated. So forgive me on that one. It's kind of a nice little boot up screen, isn't it? It's currently, by the way, the system has composite out and S-Video out. And I've got it through S-Video out going into a RetroTink 4K, and then you can see this menu over here. Now, I don't have a controller plugged in at the moment, and that'll be more obvious as to why in a bit, but if you take a look at the screen, you'll see several options. The one that we care about for our purposes is this one with the little red icon over there. That's your memory card manager. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn the system off just so the lighting gets fixed, but basically, you'd have to go into there, and the reason you're going to do that, let me walk you through this. It needs to be understood that this memory card, if you want to call it that, is a little funky in that it doesn't perform exactly like you would expect a memory card to function like, and it requires what they call initialization, which in effect is formatting. So I use the game Farland Story FX to basically test this. This is a good example of a game to use because it's an RPG. RPGs, obviously, they want you to save because those are long games and you're not going to sit there and play the entire thing in one go. So naturally, that game supports saving. So when you turn on the game for the first time, you will be presented with an error screen basically saying like, hey, I need to be able to save and I can't. So I've, just for the purposes of the video being easier, I've got screenshots of this that I took, and they're translated via Google Translate into English. So that's why they look a little weird, but you get the messaging. Essentially, it's saying it can't save this unless you go ahead and initialize the system memory. So what you want to do at that point is you go into that little red icon that I was just talking about. If you have the memory card installed, you'll see effectively in the upper right corner 2 options instead of just 1. If you only have 1, then it's only seeing the internal memory, it's not seeing the card, which could be a potential different problem I didn't run into, but just saying it should have 2 if you have the card. Now what you're going to want to do is initialize both, aka format both. Now there are options, and again I'm going to show it on screen. It's a very simple process. The only issue with it is the entire system is exclusively runs in Japanese text. So if you can't speak or read Japanese, which I cannot, what you're going to have to do is take photos of the screen, use your phone, Google Translate it, and come back, or just use the screenshots I've used in this video, and just follow that process along. But basically, go ahead and format both. And once you have done that, you can then run the game. I don't know about your PC-FX, but the run times on this, the load times on this machine are kind of horrible. But anyway, once it gets past all that, you'll get back into the game, and then the menu will look completely different within the game. It'll say from the beginning, which effectively means like this is your save state, which is the very beginning of the game, so let's go ahead and get started. And from there, you would just play the game as normal, and it would save. Now, here's the thing that you need to understand. In addition to formatting this card, there is one other little catch to it. Now, the formatting is not a big deal. That's fine. The other catch to it, though, is that, and this is not the fault of the card, it has to do with the way NEC designed it. So NEC designed this system not in most cases, to save game data to the card itself, but to just use the card as like an archiving system. There's very few games that will actually save directly to the card or ever offer you that option. So what does that mean? It means that if I play Farland Story, which I did, the save that it generates will go into the internal memory, and that is where it needs to be in order for you to continue your gameplay adventure or to, you know, do anything of any note with that save. However, because the internal memory is very limited to only 32 kilobytes, if you're the type of person who's trying to play multiple games and doing, you know, wants to manage multiple games at once and you don't want to delete your games, that's where you're going to have to get into save data management, which again is that red icon that you saw on the dashboard there. From there, you can go ahead and move your saves to the backup archive and just keep it there. But keep in mind, it can't be played off of that in most cases. It can only just sit there and be archived. If anything, it's probably safer there because the newer tech allows it to be less likely to subject to corruption, whereas the internal memory, even mine, was actually corrupted. It just required a reinitialization. It was fine, but that process formats everything. In other words, any save you want that is important to you, keep it on the card, but if you actually want to play it, either clone it or move it entirely over to the internal system memory, play it, and then move it back. It's basically the expectation of data management. That is not the fault of the card itself. It's a limitation of the way NEC designed it, but Humble Bazooka basically took a problem with the PC-FX, which was the lack of cards and the battery flaw, and eliminated both. You now have a readily available option if you want to play the PC-FX and have the saved data, and you don't have to deal with batteries. So on that, I give it basically a perfect score. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. The only thing that would have theoretically been nicer about it is if it had more storage capacity, but given that the system only has 62 games and effectively everything is going to save on there anyway, I don't really know what the point is. The only reason that might matter, and I doubt it ever will, is if there was some massive movement to, like, you know, there's a big port on the back of the system for communication with other devices. If you were able to load some sort of plug and play ODE into this thing, similar to like the Satiator for the Sega Saturn, and then suddenly a homebrew community took off for this and needed more saves, then that's when you would be like, okay, I really wish this card had more space. But that is astronomically unlikely to occur. It's just technically it's a negative, but it's not a significant one. So the other device in question is the PC-FX BT, the Bluetooth, this little dongle. That's all this really is. So we're just going to go ahead and plug it into the controller port, as it should be relatively obvious what the purpose of this is. This device basically just allows you to sync a Bluetooth controller to the system and use it instead of the standard controller. Now this is the standard controller over here. Perfectly fine controller. Cable length isn't great, just because a lot of time Japanese systems that were actually released in Japan, as opposed to, like, say, a Super Nintendo that is Japanese but obviously came out in North America, the cable length tends to be a lot shorter. I noticed this especially with PC Engine stuff. So the cable length on it isn't great. That can be, you know, ignored, but the other more likely problem is PC-FX controllers are not super common, whereas you're much more likely to have, like, for example, it is compatible with the Switch Pro controller. It's compatible with, I want to say, the PS4 and PS5 controllers. I think technically PS3 controllers. There's a few different controllers that it's compatible with, and as well as some generic just Bluetooth controllers. And then from there, you could at the very least play the games if you're the type of person who managed to track down the system, but you couldn't necessarily find a controller for it. Now, pairing it is relatively easy. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on in a second. Once it was on the first time, obviously the Switch didn't natively start to look for it, or the Switch controller didn't initially look for it. So there's a sync button on there's two buttons here. One of them is specifically for the purposes of syncing to the controller. I think it was the top one, but either way, just fiddle with it for a minute and you'll figure it out. And then there's also a sync button on the controller itself. And then once you have done that, it's trying to play the game. But as you can see, I'm pressing there and it's moving around. Yeah, see, that's all the D-pad here and it's moving there. It works just fine. It also has the options for remapping controllers. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off just because of the lighting. It has the option for remapping the buttons, etc. It's relatively simple to use. After it has been paired, you'll notice right there I didn't have to pair it. It's smart enough to know from that point if I turn the system on with the dongle in it, as long as I power up the controller, they will re-find each other. So you're all good to go on that front. Very simple process. Whether or not you want to get a dedicated controller for the PC-FX is your choice, but or you can just repair this with a Switch later. It doesn't really matter. Pairing it is not that hard of a process. So All good there. It seemed to work just fine. That device, now I'm not sure how you do this exactly, but it does have the capacity, and the reason I say I don't know how to do this is I don't see any obvious ports for this, but this device is capable of being firmware updated, which is pretty cool. And apparently, because of that, they're working on a couple of additional features. The most notable one, in my opinion, is mouse support. There was very few accessories released for the PC-FX, but there was a mouse released for it. In fact, Farland Story, again, is one of the games actually compatible with the mouse. So in its current form, it is compatible with Bluetooth mice, but the huge asterisk to that is apparently most mice aren't actually compatible. You have to find like very specific ones. Their firmware update process is trying to make more and more of them compatible. What I guess I'm trying to say is, if you're into the PC-FX and you want a mouse for it, theoretically, the PC-FX Bluetooth adapter will make it possible for you at least to use a mouse. Obviously not the OEM original, but you could use a mouse on the system. You just might have to find the right combination, or at least wait till the firmware is up to date. But yeah, I really have no complaints with either one. I guess the sort of complaint with this is I'm not entirely certain how the firmware process works if you want to update it, just because, again, there's no port, and I don't know if that means it's hidden underneath the 3D printed plastic, and if I have to get past that to get to it. I honestly don't know. It's whatever. But either way, it is technically possible, the firmware, or it might just have to be linked to your computer. Honestly, I'm not totally sure. That said, yeah, these devices do exactly what is advertised of them and expected of them, and the fact that they even exist at all in 2024, that we have new PC-FX accessories to try and upgrade a system that very few people have, and even fewer people would, I would think, care all that much about. You got to give a round of applause to the retro gaming scene for keeping stuff like this alive. So huge shout out to Humble Bazooka for having the commitment to actually make these kind of products, and an even bigger shout out to Stone Age Gamer for making it possible for me to be able to review these things. I also want to give a shout out to some people in my Discord, specifically a guy named Cax, as well as a guy we call Fox, because they're the only two people I know that care a lot about the PC-FX, and Cax helped me do a little bit of the homework on specific points about the data sizes of the memory cards, etc. So thank you very much for that. Now, with all that said, if you want to check these out, or check out any of the other stuff available from Stone Age Gamer, I will put a link in the description. You can check them out and support them and pick these up, or pick up other stuff that they've got if you want. As well as, I'd also appreciate if you guys would like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all my social media stuff. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, and yeah, as always, I appreciate you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.